It's Wednesday, June 24. Good afternoon, I'm Herman Green with the Midday News. A special welcome if you're watching online at onespotmedia.com. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, has lowered its global growth forecast for this and next year in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. It now predicts a decline of almost 5% in 2020, substantially worse than the forecast only 10 weeks ago in April. The UK economy is expected to contract more than 10% this year, followed by a partial recovery in 2021. Now, that would be the most severe declines, although not as deep as forecast for Italy, France, or Spain. The IMF's managing director, Kristalina Georgieva, had already warned that the April forecast had been overtaken by events and that the likely path of the global economy was looking worse. That is reflected in the new projections for both the world and the British economy. The recession caused by the pandemic globally and in many individual countries is likely to be deeper than the IMF previously thought. The previous April forecasts were a 6.5% decline for the UK and 3% for the world. Now, poverty in Jamaica declined by 6.7 percentage points in 2018. In 2017, the poverty rate was 19.3%, but in 2018, it dropped to 12.6%. Finance Minister Dr. Nigel Clark gave the update in Parliament on Tuesday following the Jamaica survey of living conditions.
This is the lowest poverty rate in 10 years and represents a 40% fall in the rate of poverty in 2018 as compared to 2015. Mr. Speaker, this is the lowest rate since 2000 of poverty since 2008. This decline may be attributed to an increase in real GDP, an increase in employment, an increase in the proportion of households in the lower quintiles that receive remittances, as well as a slowing in the rate of inflation.
Now, opposition spokesman on finance, Mark Golding, welcomed the news, adding that the reduction was due to a number of factors.
The massive infrastructure expenditure on road projects funded by the Chinese in particular, which were at their heyday in 2018 and have since ended. The mining and quarrying results, with Alpat coming back on stream largely as a result of the work done by the previous administration, carried on thereafter by this administration, and the other factors which have been spoken to.
The business process outsourcing BPO sector lost roughly $42 million in revenue due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Portfolio Minister Daryl Vaz gave the update in Parliament on Tuesday as he made his contribution to the sectoral debate.
The sector lost approximately $42 million in revenue due to the COVID restrictions. Members will recall that following the increase in cases due to outbreak, a decision was taken to close all BPOs on April 22nd, 2020. Despite this, we managed to retain more than 33,000 workers in the sector and are moving to see how best we can retrieve approximately 7,000 jobs due to the measures imposed to curb the spread of the virus. We have already extended the work from home arrangements for approximately 40% of the call center agents for 3 months, which will end on August 31st, 2020.
Minister Vaz said new protocols have been approved for the BPO industry going forward. Before COVID-19, the sector was poised to create between 5,000 and 6,000 jobs each year.
All being equal, Mr. Speaker, we expect to see a rebound in the sector by the end of the 2021 fiscal year, with a move towards the original projection of 50,000 jobs by March 2022. Mr. Speaker, the Global Services Association has noted, however, the growth will be contingent upon the recovery of the United States, which is our main market.
The People's National Party, PNP, is urging the government to push back against attempts by the United States to sanction Cuba's COVID-19 medical brigades. The United States legislature had introduced a new law targeting countries that have accepted Cuban healthcare workers in the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. Jamaica recently invited and accepted the assistance of more than 140 Cuban healthcare personnel in the country's current fight against COVID-19. In a news release, the PNP's Shadow Minister for Health, Dr. Maurice Guy, said he is very troubled that the Holness administration has not yet rejected the actions by the U.S. Senate to impose sanctions on countries like Jamaica for their engagement with the Cuban medical mission. Dr. Guy says Cuba has always stood with the people of Jamaica in challenging times from the 1970s through to today's COVID-19 pandemic crisis. He believes the Andrew Holness-led administration should make its position clear on the matter on behalf of the Jamaican people by condemning the latest maneuver to isolate Cuba. Dr. Guy further stated that, quote, "This move by the United States Senator is absurd and must be condemned by all sovereign nations, and the Jamaican government must use its diplomatic goodwill to push back against this ridiculous proposal." End quote. Now, experts say the size and concentration of the cloud of Saharan dust blanketing Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean is the most significant in 50 years and are warning of health risks. According to the Associated Press, air quality across most of the region has reached record hazardous levels. Experts nicknamed the event the Godzilla dust cloud. We have the details from Janela Precious.
Environmental health specialist with the University of Puerto Rico, Pablo Mendez Lazaro, says conditions are dangerous in many Caribbean islands. Mr. Lazaro, who is working with NASA to develop an alert system for the arrival of the Saharan dust, said the concentration was so high in recent days that it could even have adverse effects on healthy people. Extremely hazy conditions and limited visibility were reported from Antigua down to Trinidad and Tobago. In Jamaica, the National Environment and Planning Agency yesterday said pollution from the Saharan dust has resulted in reduced air quality in Kingston. The agency says this will continue today. According to the U.S. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, the mass of extremely dry and dusty air, known as the Saharan air layer, forms over the Sahara Desert. It moves across the North Atlantic every 3 to 5 days from late spring to early fall, peaking in late June to mid-August. It can occupy a roughly 2-mile thick layer in the atmosphere. Meteorologists say a small tropical wave headed to the Caribbean is expected to alleviate conditions tomorrow.
We now take a break here on the Midday News, but we'll be right back. Please stay with us. Welcome back, continuing the news. The Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions, DPP, is refuting claims in the print media that no one has been charged for the shooting death of Winston Malcolm Sr. and Winston Malcolm Jr. on December 21, 2007 in Spanish Town, St. Catherine. A statement from the DPP's office revealed that 2 officers were to be charged for the deaths. One, Malika Reed, has since been charged, while the other, Omar Simmons, has been at large since. According to the release in 2009, after receiving outstanding documents from the investigators, the DPP's office ruled that the matter be referred to the Special Coroner's Court. Now, in 2015, after an inquiry by the Special Coroner's Court, a verdict was reached for Corporal Malika Reed and Constable Omar Simmons to be charged with murder. The file was then sent to the office of the DPP on May 4, 2018. On July 19, 2019, a warrant for the arrest of both officers was made. The warrant was executed on Mr. Reed on July 30, 2019. He was taken before the Home Circuit Court. On July 30, 2019, the DPP referred a voluntary bill of indictment charging Mr. Reed for 2 counts of murder. Now, since then, Mr. Reed's case has been before the Home Circuit Court for plea and case management hearings. Mr. Reed is to stand trial on October 10, 2022, relating to the deaths. Municipal corporation officers have been put under scrutiny after a video of an operation in Linstead Market, St. Catherine, put them in a bad light. The cops have told their side of that story, but are also calling for more support so they can effectively carry out their job. For officer with the St. Catherine Municipal Corporation, Lenworth Grant, the job of a municipal officer is dangerous. While expressing love for his career, he also tells the harrowing stories of his colleagues. He recalls one being chopped in the head with a scale by a market vendor, and another whose arm was broken with a baseball bat by a taxi driver whose car was being clamped.
Co-worker's face was shattered also with a baseball bat by a bus driver who attacked him, who trailed him and attacked him. I have another co-worker who was assaulted with a pipe, with a piece of metal pipe. I have another co-worker whose home was bombed as a result of us doing our job. And her house was firebombed while she was in there with her son.
He says despite the attacks, they continue to go about their job each day. But it's made even more difficult, as he says they are not adequately insured for the associated dangers.
The insurance policy that we have, it doesn't cover us while we're on the job in the streets. It doesn't cover us. And this is why none of the municipal officers who has gotten hurt on the job has gotten anything, because the insurance policy doesn't cover us. So if the insurance policy doesn't cover us during our work, so when are we covered? And how does that work for us?
He believes these issues need to be addressed urgently. For the insurance issue, he wants that to be revisited at a policy level. As for the altercations on the road and the markets, he is suggesting an education campaign for members of the public.
They always say that, oh, you're not police, you're always trying to do police work, and we're often badgered and verbally abused because they do not understand our job description, what our job entails. So I think a big part or a big obstacle in the municipal police doing their job is that the public do not understand what our job description is.
He is calling on the local government ministry to address these issues as part of the effort to prevent a recurrence of last week's incident. An investigation has been launched into the cause of a fire this morning that destroyed a business establishment along Barnett Street in Montego Bay, St. James. Fire investigator for the St. James Division, O'Neill Carr, says sometime after 5 o'clock, firefighters received a call about the fire.
Upon the arrival of the team, they observed a bar, a bike shop, along with several vehicles, including motorcycles that were parked within the vicinity, all engulfed in fire.
Mr. Carr says a bike shop, a bar, and a garage were destroyed.
At least 3 vehicles, one Honda CRV, a Coaster, and another car was affected by the fire. The CRV is totally destroyed. The other 2 vehicles are partially destroyed. And there are several motorcycles that are within the yard that are also seriously affected and destroyed by the fire.
3 units responded to the blaze. There were no reports of any injuries. And it's time now for a preview of what's coming up in this evening's Health Report.
In the next edition of the Health Report, we look at the Saharan dust and its likely impact on children.
So there is a study which was conducted in the African region, looking at children risk of getting ill because of the dust plume. And what that preliminary study had suggested is that chance of that risk of increase is increased by about 17 to 22%, depending on the particular region of Africa where the children were looked at. So at the very least, this study is saying to us that these children are at an increased risk of becoming ill or suffering death.
That's the Health Report this evening in Primetime News. And now for today's healthy living tip. Stay indoors as much as possible. Wear face masks when going outside. Wear long-sleeve clothing and also protect your eyes. Wash hands regularly and avoid touching of eyes. Ensure water that is harvested is treated. And cover water used for domestic purposes, including for drinking and food preparation.
We go on to news in sports. Should the Caribbean Premier League take place this year, it will do so without the involvement of Jamaica's Chris Gayle, who has opted out of this year's staging. A day before the players' draft is scheduled to take place, Gayle announced that he would not be available, citing family reasons. Jermaine Brown tells us more.
Gale communicated his decision on Monday to the St. Lucia Zouks, the franchise he was set to play for in this year's Caribbean Premier League, stating he would not be available for the coronavirus pandemic. He was not able to be with his family, including his young child, who are in Zouks had signed Gale as one of the marquee players outside the draft in the US $130,000 to $160,000 price bracket. In his absence, the franchise is now likely to get the first pick at the draft. It is not clear whether Gale's decision was influenced by the pay cut proposed by the CPL in the wake of the pandemic. Recently, CPL operations manager Michael Hall said top-earning players would be asked to take a pay cut of up to 30% compared to the 2019 contract. In Gale's case, he would have received about one.
And that's it for the midday news. But remember, the primetime package is at 7. Please join us then. On behalf of the News, Sports and Production teams, I'm Herman Green. Good afternoon.